5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You ever wonder what kids did for fun on a Saturday night 100 years ago?
I don't know. I guess I always figured they got into their parents' wagon and went cruising up and down their main drag, playing loud banjo music and acting like idiots.
So you think this is as good as it gets?
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait You Haven't Seen, and it's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. This is episode number 213, and our movie this week was A History of Violence from 2005. And joining me to talk about it is Gerald from Two Peas on a Pod. Gerald, how you doing?
Travis, what's up, man? It's great to see you. I feel like last time we recorded, there was no video, so
Yeah,
maybe
there wasn't.
there was. I don't know.
No, there definitely wasn't, and I remember why. I had a different setup, so I've fixed a few things so we can see
good
each
to
other
see
now.
you.
Yeah, it's
Good
been
to
a
chat
while.
with you. Thanks for having me, man, for sure.
Absolutely. So you mentioned A History of Violence. You had not seen this before, correct?
That's right, man. It's kind of an interesting story, and it kind of ties into my podcast a little bit, this is not a shameless plug. It just is part of the story, but I never saw this movie. Obviously, I was super into movies when it came out, and not only that, I was super into Cronenberg, and I still am, but I just never saw this. I didn't catch it in the theater, and I don't know. I just, for whatever reason, it kind of passed me by, and I just never worked it into my daily routine when I was catching up on stuff. And it's been a blind spot for me for, 18 years now. So I have a patron of my show, a great dude named Dan Roski, who found me. I can't even remember at this point. He's been a patron for a few years, but he lives out in California, and he found me when I guested on somebody else's show. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but anyway, so he's been following me ever since then. A few years ago, and on one of my episodes, like, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, somebody brought this movie up for Viggo Mortensen. We were discussing him on my show.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't really have anything to say because unfortunately I haven't seen it. It's a huge blind spot for me, blah, blah, blah. My guest couldn't believe it. My patron, Dan, couldn't believe it. And this is about a year ago or so, and he mailed me the Blu-ray, and he was like, you need to watch this immediately. That's the good news. The bad news is that was a year ago, and I just watched it. And there's even a stupider part to the story. I own it on Blu-ray, but my family was asleep last night, and I didn't pop it in until like 1 a.m., so I just rented it for $3 on Amazon Prime so I could stream it.
Oh,
so
that's
the
even
Blu-ray
better.
that Dan sent me, which I'm going to send him this episode to listen to, but the Blu-ray that my friend Dan sent me is still in the wrapper, probably right behind me. But I have seen it now. So that's kind of the story of how I just really, really needed to see this movie. And whenever you hit me up to come on your show, obviously that's what we're talking about, is something that I haven't seen. So I said, please, let's do this one. I think
Absolutely.
you mentioned it as one of the options, and it jumped out at me right away.
Yeah, so I kind of have I have a similar story without the patron sending me a Blu-ray that I didn't watch and instead rented it, which is I love that, by the way, and Dan's
right.
going to love that
It's like,
story too.
I'm in
It's
bed.
so good.
I'm just like, it's $3. Like, let me just watch it.
So similar to you, I was really into movies when this came out, but I didn't see it. I like Cronenberg a lot, but I went through a period right around this movie. I had seen, did you ever see his movie Spider with Ralph Fiennes?
Yeah, it's been a long time, but yes.
I saw that and I didn't get it, and it sort of soured me on Cronenberg just a little bit for a couple of years. I'm pretty sure if I go back and watch it now, like, I'm going to get more out of it than I did at that point. I just wasn't in the right headspace for it. But I saw the trailer for this and I thought, well, that just looks like a I don't know, revenge movie of some kind. It's like another version of Walking Tall or something like that, right? Small town guy. And so it didn't grab me, even though I love Viggo Mortensen, I love Ed Harris. And then I just sort of, and then it went out of sight, out of mind. I didn't think about it for a long time. But recently, I've been really trying to dive back into some of this really cerebral stuff. I've been watching a lot of David Lynch
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching, getting more into like balancing it out. 'Cause, I mean, last week's episode of this show was Wing Commander, so I'm kind of swinging the pendulum all the way back now from Wing Commander and doing this. So this was a perfect opportunity, and yeah, it was one of those I mentioned, and you jumped right on it, and I was like, perfect, let's do it, because it's a blind spot for me too, and I want to get your opinion on this because I had a good time with it. What
So
did you
this
think
was your
of it?
first time as well?
This was my first time watching it as well.
That's great. I don't think until you just told that story, I don't think I knew that. I was under the impression that you had seen it prior and maybe you were going to rewatch it. But, well, I mean, I feel like as I was watching it, and this is just last night, not even 24 hours ago,
Mhm.
so it's still fresh. I haven't watched anything since I watched this. It's the last thing I saw. As I was watching it, I was kind of thinking in my head, man, this is kind of dated. Like it felt like it came out or it felt like it was made in like the late 80s or something. And that was my initial reaction, like with that opening sequence with the two hitmen at the
Yep.
motel. And like, I don't know, it just played really slowly and almost like they didn't have a budget for effects or sound design, or like it wasn't around or something when the movie
Mhm.
was made, but it was '05. So of course all that stuff was.
Right.
So as I'm kind of letting the movie sink in and the story of the movie, which I really enjoyed, like the script, I'm thinking maybe that was intentional because Cronenberg's a weird dude. So maybe he kind of stripped it back on purpose.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm kind of thinking, because obviously he knows what he's doing. So I feel like it was supposed to be a very kind of toned down, um, not flashy, kind
Yep.
of like you said, kind of small town hero story. And we get kind of this plot twist, which annoyed me because I kind of saw that coming as well. It was no surprise to me at all. Like I kind of knew, and I assume we can discuss spoilers on this, but
Absolutely.
I kind of knew, that he was Joey, and I
Mhm.
just I would have been more shocked had he not been. Let's put it that way. Um, so yeah, I mean, overall, and I know we'll get into it, but I mean, overall, I did really like it. I really enjoyed it. There was some cringy stuff in this that we can talk about when we get to certain scenes or whatever
Yeah.
that I kind of hated, but overall, I feel like I'm glad I watched it. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had sort of a similar thing. Watching it for the first time, it does have a very kind of 70s film, 80s film feel to it, like those
Yeah.
low budget, that style of filmmaking. But this feels like one of those movies that the further you get away from watching it that first time, the more you like it, because you start to kind of peel back some of the layers, and it makes you think about things. And I do feel like I'm with you. There are a couple scenes that are cringy and tough, but the overall, like, it feels like a movie that on a second watch is going to open up a little bit more, and you're gonna think, because you're gonna see it completely differently that second time. Like this first time watching it, you're not quite sure exactly who Tom is while you're watching Vigo's character, because you're sort of like, it's not trying to hide anything, but it's the performance of it. He's very soft spoken, and then it's those little touches that Vigo does to make the character into Joey, that you start to see this, and it's not done. They even make they make the comment about it. Maria Bello's character does that. Are you a schizo? Are you some multiple
Right.
personality? And it's not really. It is that, but it's not. Like, it's not a disassociative identity where
Right.
he doesn't know who Joey versus Tom is. It's sort of this conscious thing that he did.
Exactly. Yeah. And he mentioned it a couple times too, and kind of defending it, where he's like, Joey's dead. Like I had to,
Mm-hmm.
get rid of him. Like I've spent so long turning into Tom. And I think he even says dialogue similar to that. So that's a good point. And Vigo's performance, particularly like in the first act, was pretty convincing to where you, on a first time watch, might be going, is he Joey? And I did
Right.
kind of like, especially like the altercation in the diner when um, Ed Harris is there and was kind of like, dude, I know who you are. Like, stop
Yeah.
being an asshole. Like, you're Joey.
Mm-hmm.
Oh sure, you're Tom. Like, and he's like, but the whole time Vigo's quote unquote in character, and he's kind of believable to where you do kind of question it for a second because of, I mean, his performance is so good, and it's, really when, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, Travis, but really when Ed Harris and the guys show up at his front yard, you kind of start to see if there was any doubt before, you're kind of like, okay, he's Joey.
Yep.
Because like even his speech kind of changes a little bit. He gets a little more gangster.
Yeah.
And obviously he starts doing his thing with, taking people out by the throat and shit, So it kind of like gets rid of any cloud of doubt that you may have had. So you're right. Vigo's performance, I mean, I don't think he got nominated for this, but I could
No,
have
he
seen
did
it.
not.
I mean, it was a really good layered performance.
It was, and one of the cool things about it is if you go back now and watch that diner scene where the two kind of drifters come in, the Stephen McHattie and the other guy, who Stephen McHattie, I always like him and stuff. He does a lot of this. He does a lot of these, like, he's on screen for a little bit of time, but
unsavory, like
yeah. And that confrontation with them, I feel like the second time watching it's going to play completely different now, because after he shoots the younger guy through the glass door, gets stabbed in the foot, turns around and shoots the older guy in the head, there's this look as he's looking at the gun, and that first time it reads with this this sort of thing, like he can't believe what just happened, and he's sort of like, it was reaction. I feel like the second time watching it's going to read different, as there's subtle things Vigo is doing with his face that I noticed later on in the movie, that where it's like it's remembering stuff that he used to be and sort of fighting that, which I thought was really interesting, because you mentioned the confrontation on the front lawn with Ed Harris and his goons. I wrote down, one of my notes was, my God, Vigo can kill with a look. The face he gives Jack when he's walking up to him is terrifying. And then as the movie progressed, I had to come back to my note and like, okay, so that was Joey looking at this kid and slowly morphing back to Tom and his father as he got closer to him. And that's such a good performance in that moment.
Yeah, you're talking about when they hug there after?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was like, because I remember thinking as I was watching, like, oh, he's pissed. And then by the time he got to Jack and embraced him, and the camera kind of pans around to them hugging, you kind of see, okay, now he's back to this kind of like caressing father. Yeah, he was going back and forth between Tom and Joey, and I don't think it was like a bipolar or like a thing, that the schizophrenic thing. I don't think it was anything like that. I think it was just more like when he had to be Joey, he was, and he didn't want to be. That was the whole point.
Yeah.
But he knew in an effort to protect his family, he was going to have to face that part of him, a part of his past and himself. So
yep.
You could see two kind of different performances from Vigo, like the first half of the movie and the second half of the movie.
Absolutely. And that very subtle thing with his voice where he'd get a little bit of Philadelphia in there, a little bit of accent.
Exactly. Yeah, I noticed that a couple times too. Yeah.
And what's great about that too is it doesn't have to be a perfect accent in this role, because here's a guy who's literally his character has spent 20 plus years trying to lose that. So even if he slips back into it and somebody could be like, oh, it's a terrible Philadelphia accent. Well, yeah, he's been trying to hide it for 20 years. So you can kind of logic it away, but it works. It's subtle enough that the first time it happened was in that scene with Ed Harris on the front lawn, and he says something to the effect of like, maybe you should just leave. But he does it just a little bit different from the voice he was doing as Tom. And it took me a second to like, wait, did I hear that right? And then the scene plays out. I was like, that's really good. That's some good work.
I agree.
Now, Vigo didn't get nominated for this, but William Hurt did for his role.
Dude, he was so fucking good in this. I got to tell you right now, like, and I had read that, I think he didn't win though, right? Or did he?
No, he did not win.
He was nominated.
He was nominated.
And I had read that he, I was looking like the Wikipedia or whatever, and I saw that he had been nominated for it. And I'm like, where is he? Because, he wasn't in the movie
I know.
forever. But when he showed up, dude, he was so good. Like, I don't know if you agree. I just felt like, aside from Vigo, he was the best, like, most memorable thing from this movie. And it was such a short thing, but he was so, like, charismatic and cool.
Oh, yeah.
But
He's
still
on screen.
kind of scary and, like, intimidating. Yeah. Like,
He's on screen for
he
like
did all
10
that stuff.
minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
in 10 minutes he does that. And my note on that was like, William Hurt is one of the few actors that can come on after Ed Harris and be more menacing and more of a threat than Ed Harris was.
I mean, Ed Harris was great too, but I don't know, man. William Hurt just really kind of hit me. I was like, wow, this is a good performance. The Broham thing that he kept using was awesome.
There was a cool confidence that Richie had as a character, and knowing who he was dealing with, that was different from Ed Harris. Ed Harris had a lot of menace to him, but he was like almost mustache twirling, very like I'm a bad guy.
It was almost intentional, right?
Yeah, and William Hurt's character is, as you said, much more charismatic. And he's
just Richie, he's the dude's brother, and he tells that story about how he tried to strangle him in his crib, and the mom, came in and was mad at him and stopped him, and he's like, better late than never, because he was getting ready to kill him or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it was like he's telling these like nostalgic like brother stories, like I love you, bro, but I'm also about to kill you, and I don't know, it was just like it was one of those scenes where I was kind of like smiling, but I'm like, what's gonna happen? I mean, I knew probably it was gonna be a happy ending, but I just loved his character in this. Like, I if it weren't for obviously the duration, because he's like you said, he's only in like 10 minutes, and Vigo's in the whole movie essentially. But if it weren't for that duration, William Hurt was the best performance. But I mean, I'm going to give it to Vigo just because he was in it for so long, and he had to keep kind of changing his persona throughout the movie. William Hurt was definitely like a one-note kind of character, but it was just so enjoyable for me. And I mean, I thought the performances all around were pretty good. I mean, most of the cringy stuff came with Maria Bello. I mean, I love her as an actress in general, but I don't know, man. What do you think about the sex scenes? There were really two of them, and they were really kind of brutal to watch. Like, I didn't like the first one with the cheerleader costume was just like hilariously cringy, and then the one on the stairs was, I guess, supposed to be kind of like a social commentary about violence, maybe in marriage. I don't really know.
Yeah,
but that was also a little weird.
And I did actually make myself yet another note during that scene where I was like, well, I mean, this is the director that made Crash. So, like, weird sex scenes are kind of his thing. But you're right in that both of them are very cringy and for different reasons. And I think because you've got that first one, she talks about how they never got to be teenagers together. And so it's like there's this really strong relationship, but she's trying to bring something into it that they didn't get to experience together, and that she wants to try and recapture. Because they've had kids for probably the entirety that they've known each other. They probably, got married because Jack is, high school. So he's got to be 17, 18. Looks like he's supposed to be like a senior. So you figure they've known each other for probably 18 years, 19 years. And so it's like she's trying to recapture that. And that's why she took him out to like her parents' home is what it felt like. And like found her old clothes.
Oh yeah.
And all
like
that kind of stuff.
Bedroom or whatever.
Yeah. And so like it is a very awkward scene, but I think it's meant to be.
I was gonna say, yeah, if it was intentionally meant to kind of make us, squirm around a little bit, then I get it. But I don't know. Again, like I said, the movie kind of seems dated, and like when you see some sex scenes from like old school horror movies in the 80s, or like. I mean, hell, even rom-coms from the 80s. Sometimes if there's like sex scenes in those R-rated movies, they're super awkward because of when they were made.
Yep.
Either they're not PC today, or like it's just kind of out of place, or like people don't do that kind of thing anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe they do. I don't know, but my wife's not doing it. I'll tell you that much.
I think so. And I think too, this movie intentionally like went out of its way to not glorify the violence that was going on screen. Like all those scenes of violence are very short, and there's no slow-mo, there's no like, the way it's shot is meant to just have it be brutal in your face, happen and be done. And they sort of did the same thing with that first sex scene where it's very awkward, and it doesn't feel like what you expect to see a scene like that be in a movie. It's sort of taking a cliche and pulling the rug out from under it. And then the second one on the stairs is like the flip side of that coin, where it's the same thing. It's trying to take the cliche of a scene that might happen, but also it's very uncomfortable to watch because this is Joey and Tom at the same time dealing with Edie, who's trying to reconcile both of these people, that the Tom that she's, because there's a moment where it's very tender between the two of them after they've been rolling around on these hard wooden stairs, and like he's grabbing her by the throat and she's violently kissing him. And so it's meant to also be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think
is
the
what I
movie did
felt.
a great job. Yeah, I agree. I think the movie, or Cronenberg, did a great job in general at kind of an overarching snapshot of violence in America, really, because there
Hmm.
was a lot of different levels of what would be considered violent behavior in the movie. We're talking about that scene on the stairs, but also like, the son Jack dealing with the bully at school,
Yep.
and how he kind of snaps, and you see a little bit of the Joey kind of genes come out in him in that scene,
Yeah.
which of course, kind of triggers Tom when he learns that, because he obviously doesn't want his kids to go through what he went through apparently. But you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the movie is almost like a commentary on the different levels of violence that we
Oh,
experience, and
absolutely.
people
And
that we're close to or whatever.
and like, and it's, I saw an interview with Cronenberg talking about a little bit. I didn't get to watch the whole thing, but he was talking about like the violence in this, and how, he's in a industry and he has a job that allows him to just play all the time. He gets to play and act and direct and do all of this kind of stuff. And he doesn't have to deal with violence in the way that some people do in the world, but it feels like everybody at some point comes across some level of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And he is able to kind of get that out in this play situation, in this work environment. But it's not always interpreted the right ways. And that sometimes this violence is visited upon people that don't deserve it, but it's also, it's not glorified. It's not looked at as a good thing, but sometimes it is a justified thing. And so he sort of had a little bit of all of that going on in this. And I think it's very interesting that a Canadian director like him, who is very much about like having things, having Canada have an identity, for him to set this movie in Middle America in the U.S.
Yeah.
I'm with you. It's very much a commentary on that, but and which is why it being uncomfortable to watch makes sense, and I feel like does give it a little bit of rewatchability, because now I kind of want to watch it with that idea in mind a second time and sort of dive into it a little further in a way.
It's weird too, and this kind of goes along with the point that you were just making, but it's funny because generally speaking, I'm annoyed by like remakes in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one of those movies where like I would be super interested to see what a remake would look like, in the next 5 years, like with modern, the world that we live in now. Like, it would be, you could remake this with, you could do a shot for shot remake, like same characters and everything, or you could just, use it as a template to do a remake with, different storyline or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like, I'm just interested to see, because this was made in '05, and with the school shootings and everything, which of course were going on then too, sadly. But
Yeah.
I don't know, violence in America, I feel like, is worse the further we get into history. So I don't know. I would almost like welcome a remake of this, to see what the filmmaker would do with it. You know what I mean? Whereas normally I would be like, stop remaking stuff. I don't know. I feel like this is a movie that I kind of want to see what, you know what I mean? Like, what the
Yeah.
interpretation would be.
Even just taking the themes of it and doing something that's set modern. But this
Right.
idea of dissecting violence, because like the scene with the bully is a great one, because again, it's a cliched scene we've seen in movies how many
Yeah.
times, where
The guy was so, like, why was he so mad?
but did that feel to you like the weakest reason to be a bully ever? Like, Stephen King is looking at this like, you could write this bully a lot deeper.
The guy caught a pop fly in the
I know.
outfield. I'm just like, why are you so upset, bro? Like, what did you think he was gonna do? Like,
Yeah.
So I feel like that could have been explored a little bit more because that must have been deeper because that doesn't really make sense. So
No, it doesn't. It
I feel
doesn't
like
make
their
sense on the
characters just hate each
surface.
other. Yeah,
There's a
I don't
lot
know,
of
but that
like,
guy was an asshole.
yeah, there's a lot of, and again, I've been watching a lot of Lynch lately, so I've sort of been in this mindset, but it feels like Cronenberg and the scriptwriter set up a bunch of things and we're like, we're not going to explain any of it. We're just going to let you kind of fill in those blanks. Like, why is this kid at his school such a jerk to him? Well,
Right.
you'll come up with a better reason than we could tell you. We'll just have that there. But I do agree that that could have been at least explored a little bit more because it feels like Jack has never even told his dad about this, and his dad's finding out that this guy's been a jerk to him all school year after he put him in the hospital.
And and you could see a dilemma. You could see a crossroads in his parenting because, and I fear this for myself when my son gets a little bit older, but you could see where he was like, I think he even said something like, well, you stand up for yourself, but you don't put him in the hospital.
Right.
And it's like, where is that, and then this is the same guy who's like blowing guys away on his lawn, 10
Mhm.
minutes later. So you
Well,
can
and
see where he's trying to have the best parts of Joey and the best parts of Tom. And it's just a really tough thing for him to pull off as a father.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Plus, there's, you can get into a nature versus nurture argument because here's Jack, who's been brought up with Tom as his dad, who's very soft spoken, who we have no evidence that he's had any kind of a violent streak whatsoever. He's just the small town diner owner. But meanwhile, he was also a mobster of some sort in Philadelphia before that, and there's some of that nature involved because Jack holds his own really well when those guys are trying to fight him in the hallway. He beats the brakes off those boys. Like,
Right.
it's not even
Right.
close.
Right.
So there's like a lot of there's those layers of different things there. And it feels like we saw a lot of tropey, cliched scenes that were not played out the way that the trope normally would. The diner confrontation, the bully confrontation, the sex scenes, all of that kind of stuff. It just felt like they wanted to say, okay, well, here's the scene you're expecting, but not the way you're expecting it, and discuss, figure it out. Because even the ending, the movie doesn't end in a way that I really expected it to. Because there's no real resolution to anything, and we just sort
I
of
took it
stop.
as I kind of like the ending, but also, and I haven't, I watched this super late last night and I had to
Mhm.
work all day today. So I haven't like watched anything or seen anybody that was involved's like, take on it or whatever. But my interpretation was that he came back to the only home he has at this point, and here I am, like, I did the shit that I did in the past, but I just want to be here with this family, the people that I love, and with no dialogue spoken, which I thought was perfect.
Oh, I love that.
I think the little girl may have said something, I can't remember, but I mean, even if she did, it was very little. But no dialogue spoken. I got the interpretation that everybody was like, okay, come back home. Here's your meatloaf, like we're going to be okay. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what I took from it. And, is this going to haunt him, killing Richie and everybody at his mansion or whatever? I mean, probably. I don't think he's going to be able to. I mean, you got to imagine there's other cronies that are going to be involved or whatever.
Yeah.
But for the story, for what it is, he went back to his family and they kind of welcomed him back in.
They did, and I'm very similar. One, I love that scene, the whole thing as it kept going, and it just kept playing out, and nobody's saying a word.
Right.
There's no dialogue, but there's so much being said by the looks on everybody's faces. Like that right there was all four of those actors in that scene were just nailing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they do bring him back. Like it's the daughter, and she sets the plate down for him, and like the son doesn't know what to do, but then he sort of
And he looks to his mom to see if she has anything to say. She doesn't say anything.
and all of that. So they are kind of, they're welcoming him back, but it's like there's a little bit of reluctance. There's a little questioning going on, and even he's questioning. He's questioning, does he belong here or not?
Right. You see reluctance in him too.
So it was brilliant and maddening at the same time, and I loved that about it. I love the ambiguity of that ending, because it's like we don't get any sense that there's a happily ever after, but that's possible for this family. But at the same time, there's also many, many years of therapy coming, or should
Yeah.
be. So,
And like I said, probably future dangers too with the mob and everything. But
oh yeah,
I don't know. This is a weird movie because it's like a movie I really liked, but it's like one of those movies where it's like there's no huge standout moments except for William Hurt, which we already
yeah,
talked about. But I mean, aside from that, it's just like kind of a movie that exists, but that's like really, you know what I mean? Like I feel like Cronenberg didn't try to, or Vigo in his performance, they didn't try to necessarily do anything that like would show up in all the clips if anybody was talking about this movie or whatever. It's just like a story that plays out pretty quietly, honestly. Like it's not super in your face, even though it's about this kind of layered story of violence, which I
yeah.
thought was also an interesting, like, artistic choice by Cronenberg, but the actors as well, the way they kind of played the characters. It was very subdued
Hmm.
and, but at the same time, very kind of like enthralling.
Yeah, and it tells this little story about what happened to this one guy, and I kind of like that they don't expand it out too far beyond that. Like he ends up going to Philadelphia, but even that, just a tiny little thing right at the end. It's like the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Right.
But I like it's sort of what it kind of reminds me of a little bit is if you took that car scene from The French Connection, where he's driving chasing the train in the car. If you take that out of The French Connection, that's a very quiet, subdued
Yeah,
type of story. It feels like
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
It's that kind of a
exactly.
film.
And you're absolutely right. And that's a very, very good analogy because that's exactly what I'm saying. Because even like the quote unquote kill scenes on the front yard or in the diner or even later at Richie's place, like even those are kind of quick and like quick cuts and like there's
Hmm.
not a lot of time spent on the murder and like, do you know what I mean? Like Cronenberg's known for like body horror and we got a little bit of that in this movie too, which I wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah.
But you could see a little bit of practical
Hmm.
body work and blood and stuff, which I really love for his kind of tenure as a director. I love that kind of creeped in there a little bit. But that stuff, it didn't linger. You know what I mean? It was
No.
very like quick and like you could blink and miss it, honestly, in a lot of those scenes. So
Yep.
even that's what I mean. So even though the movie is about violence, it kind of has that underlying rhetoric, and the title of the movie is History of Violence. It's not really violent. Like, I mean, it
No.
is, but it's like quickly, like, here's a quick violent scene, 90 seconds, we're out. And now we're back to
Yeah.
just being small town family. So I thought that was I feel like that was a choice because this could have been a very bloody, violent movie, like a mob movie,
Hmm.
but it was more like a small town family story with like this mob stuff kind of popping up here and there.
Yeah, and that was one thing I did see was Cronenberg kind of said, and Vigo too wanted to kind of not. They didn't want to make it about the violence visually, but they wanted the violence to be an integral part of the story being told.
Right.
But I love the way that it's this slow burn. It's like that opening scene. Now, number one, I'm a sucker for a long take, always. Like I just love long takes. An opening scene is like a 4.5 minute long take where nothing happens. It's
And
the
I'm
two
going, what
guys.
is this?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and you don't even realize it's a long take until like he pulls the car up in front, and then that's when I was like, oh, they haven't cut yet. It's just been this like tracking shot, and it stays all the way till he walks inside, and like you just get this feeling like, oh, because of the way Stephen McHattie was like, drive up to the office, I'll check us out, and then it's literally 30 feet that he drives the car.
Right.
And he comes walking out and very subtly wiping his hand and throwing away the rag.
And I heard a faint woman scream too
Yeah,
when he went inside. So I was like, something bad happened.
Yeah, and so then when the
But I
other
didn't
guy
know if
goes
it was like a.
inside,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, when he gets up to go inside, okay, something bad happened, and we're gonna see something not great. But then it went darker. It went so much darker when he got inside than I anticipated. It was another one of those
With a
moments
little
where
girl.
Yeah.
I
that was
Well, I
rough.
mean, when you see McHattie, you're like, he's not a good dude. I mean,
Right. So
You just inherently think that, which also would have been an interesting choice had they cast him and it not been that. Well, that'd have been crazy. But or whoever decides to do that someday, if that ever happens. But the movie took a while to get me. or
Hmm.
to sink me, to hook me in, because
Sure.
I was kind of going, what the hell is happening here? Like, did he forget to like produce this part of the movie, or what the hell's going on? Like, I feel like he just like filmed these guys on his phone or something in the motel parking lot. It was weird. So, can I also ask you real quick? And I know
Sure.
you just saw it for the first time too, but I know you probably did some research. So, are these two dudes like related in any way to the Philadelphia mob stuff, or it's just like a red herring?
No, it's a red herring. So the only
Okay.
thing uh, I read that the two of them kind of came up with their own backstory. That the older guy McHattie was the younger guy's uncle, and he had gotten out of
Okay.
prison and was just like they were just going around the country, but they didn't
Just
have
like
any tie
robbing
or any.
people and stuff.
Yeah, they didn't have any tie or relationship to anything. They were just moving from place to place, taking
So they were
money.
just kind of
And
like vagabond criminals or whatever, and
yep,
it just led to the altercation in the diner, basically.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They were
I mean, that's kind
essentially
of what I thought, but I was also kind of like, did I miss a tie-in, or like, because I thought maybe I missed something.
well,
But yeah.
because there's that one moment where when they come into the town when the douchebag from the high school's in his truck and he goes to pull the U-turn and gets in front of him and he flips him off and they just stare at him and he immediately gets scared.
Right.
And there was a moment where I'm like, oh, do they have some kind of a reputation? But no, they just look rough.
And another reason I asked too is because when they were in the diner, and I mean, I know they're obviously just, inherently assholes or whatever, but when they were in the diner, it was kind of similar to like when Ed Harris went to the diner too. So
Yeah.
I'm like, well, maybe they knew him as Joey or whatever, and they weren't, you know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
don't know. I kind of left it up to interpretation, but I was also just making sure I didn't miss something about them being kind of attached.
From what I can tell, no, there wasn't any
Yeah.
attachment.
Okay.
Which
I mean, I didn't
works.
see one, so I was making
and
sure.
it kind of works for, again, the themes in the movie where it's like violence just sort of happens and
Mhm.
it's that inciting incident and the fact that it's glorified by the news. Because if you notice, we never see any police procedure around these murders at all, these killings. Like there's two people die in that diner and all we get is whatever, like the next day or something where it's boarded up in front and just everybody's there. So we never get anything
Business
with
is booming.
yeah, exactly. We never get anything with that, but we get a lot of the press, and him flipping through every channel's got the news story about him, and he becomes this national hero, which is what gets Ed Harris's attention and brings him in. So it's like it was just interesting the way that all went down. It is
Yeah,
a
great.
movie that I do feel like I've got to know somebody well enough to suggest it to them, because I think that it doesn't have the action beats and the story beats to hold certain people's attention. Like
I
it's
can see
just
that.
it's going to be too slow of a burn, and then when it does have that action or something happens, it's going to be for some people it's going to be really difficult to watch too.
To your point, I really did appreciate the length, though. I thought it was perfectly
Oh, yeah.
paced, and it ended like we already talked about on a great note. And I love that they didn't drag it out. And a lot of that probably goes to the point of like what I was talking about earlier with the action sequences too, with the actual violent scenes in the movie where they were kind of short.
Mm-hmm.
Because Cronenberg in his old days would have, I mean, it would have been a 5-minute scene of him ripping out throats and, blood going everywhere. And like,
Yeah,
that would have been his thing in the 80s. But this is a much more toned down family story.
Yeah, a lot of that, like especially his earlier body horror stuff, is about transformation. So you get like the fly and the transformation, and you can work like envy into that, and there was the jealousy that got him to do it in the first, but whatever. And this felt like he was taking those same kinds of an idea, but instead of showing them visually, he was making it all this internal thing in Viggo Mortensen's character. All of this transformation was happening without any visual cues for it, other than maybe his pupils dilate a little bit more, and the look on his face will change, and that subtle change to his voice. So it was very interesting to me to see Cronenberg kind of tone himself down like that. And it does make me think that
too.
If I go back and watch Spider again, the movie that I didn't like, that I probably will enjoy it a lot more, because I feel like I don't think I would have liked this in 2005.
There's some blind spots for him. Looking at his filmography right now, there's some blind spots for me in it, but It's funny because this one obviously, and then a movie that he did a couple years later with Vigo called Eastern Promises, I also haven't seen, and I just feel like they're like kind of un-Cronenberg-y.
Hmm.
Like they don't seem very Cronenberg-esque. So I wonder if that's why I didn't like jump on them immediately. Um,
Yeah, no, I could see that because
but
it would be like watching a bunch of Ridley Scott movies and then finding out, oh, he made Thelma and Louise, and you'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't feel like Ridley Scott to me, but it
right,
is.
right, right.
And yeah, they're very un-Cronenberg. When you think of Cronenberg, you think of Scanners, you think of The Fly or Videodrome, all those crazy visuals. And there was actually a deleted scene in this movie that would have been a dream sequence. I'm glad they cut it out because I feel like having all of the internal struggle in Tom be something we never get to see, I think works better. But they had a dream sequence where he's in the diner and he shoots Ed Harris's character and with a shotgun, and he's got like the whole chest cavity blown out. But then Ed Harris gets up and points a gun at him and shoots him, and that ends the dream. And like, so it would have been much more Cronenberg kind of visuals and a little weird.
Hmm.
I'm kind of glad they cut it. I also,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I also like the behind the scenes that I heard about where while they're doing it, I think it was Vigo or somebody suggests that Ed Harris should pull the gun from the chest wound. And Cronenberg was like, I mean, it's a good idea, but I kind of did that already in Videodrome, so maybe not.
That's
Maybe
true. Yeah.
maybe we won't do that. But I feel like that again. That's Cronenberg restraining himself in this by cutting that scene out and letting it
Hmm.
instead all that kind of stuff that would have been the visuals of that scene. Just let it play out in sort of the performance of Viggo Mortensen. So
Yeah, and overall, it's a very restrained Cronenberg movie, which I think is part of why I liked it too, because it subverted those expectations of what we think of.
yeah,
And even a movie like Crash, which I mean, I don't hate it, but I'm not like a huge fan of it. But I mean, even a movie like that was a little more in your face, and there was a lot more like
for sure.
kind of, like
And
gravitas put into the scenes and stuff. Whereas this was just, like I said, just very quiet and very performance heavy. And I mean, aside from a few awkward scenes, I thought it was great.
yeah, and I think that by having it like that, the violence they do show is much more impactful. When he hits him with that coffee pot on the side of the head,
Hmm.
which, like, because you're not expecting it at that point, that type of a reaction. I mean, kind of are as a movie watcher, but like, it's still from the character's perspective. It
Yeah, I was gonna
doesn't.
say he seemed very like I'm a small town guy, like I'm
Yeah,
scared, and then all of a sudden he's fucking taking dudes out. So
yeah. So he cracks him with the coffee pot, and we see that, and that's one thing. But then to have the shot of McHattie's character with like his jaw just gone from getting shot in the head like that, and that there was that Cronenberg moment,
hmm
and it then hits you. It's like it's even more visceral at that point to have it
right,
happen because we're not in a movie that's like that. And it was the same thing with the guy getting his nose smashed in, and then showing one quick dolly in shot of him where he's bleeding and all of that from his nose. Was another one that really was impactful. Same thing with
hmm
the scene at the end with Richie's goons where he stomps
yeah,
on the
great,
guy. The- I
very
don't know,
quick, and
and I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't know that I've seen a throat stomp like that before. Like that felt like something I hadn't really ever seen
mm, I gotta be
happen.
honest with you, I don't know if I have. I mean, it's probably happened, but I don't know that I can recall seeing one either. I mean, obviously the curb stomp and American History X came much later, but yeah, I don't. Yeah, you might be right.
But it was I wasn't ready for it. Like there was multiple times in this movie that I should have been expecting certain things, and I just like the movie would take a left on me, and I just
Yeah,
didn't see it coming. The one exception being when Jack shoots Ed Harris.
you saw that
That's
happening.
like the whole as the scene is playing out, and then he shoots him. I'm like, okay, yeah, they sort of set us up for that, but it still was.
I do like that it was quick enough to where you didn't really have time to think about it though,
Yes.
because I thought about it after the scene played out, where I was like, what would have happened there? Because obviously he was going to be killed. There's like 30 minutes left in the movie.
Right.
So is the gun going to be out of bullets? Is, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. How are they getting out of this one?
but I did like that Cronenberg shot it in a way where you didn't really have time to think about it, and next thing you know, Jack shoots him. So I'm not saying like, I guess what I'm saying, in other words, it didn't surprise me that that's what happened, but I didn't have time to like see it coming.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah,
Yes, it surprised me. It didn't surprise me, but I didn't see it coming that way because, and also
right.
the way they shot it. You know, the last time we saw Jack, he was sitting. He was inside, I think, or sitting on the porch, and he was freaked out. So we never
Right.
see him. Like a different director in a different movie is going to have some sort of insert shot showing him getting up, picking up the shotgun, because you have to play to the lowest common denominator and show your audience everything, right? And Cronenberg
Well,
doesn't do that. Instead, it goes from here to here,
yeah,
and
and in that
that's
scene, he told Jack to go back in the house,
Mhm.
and then that's when his voice changed a little bit. His
Yeah.
dialect went a little more mobster, and then when he's on the ground, he's like, "I should have killed you in Philly." And later, when his wife, kind of confronts him about it, he's like, "What did you hear?" Because he thought she heard him say that, but
Yep.
she saw him brutally murder three guys on the
Yeah.
lawn, so it doesn't matter what he said.
Right.
Some small town diner owner is not going to be able to take out three mobsters, at
Hmm.
the drop of a dime. So, kind of the detachment from reality too, I thought was interesting with Joey's character in that scene too.
Yeah. Were you aware that this is based off a graphic novel?
Not until after I saw it, I was looking on some different reviews and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." Yeah, but I
Yeah.
didn't know that when I watched it though.
And some people will put it on like, oh, best comic book movies. I wouldn't call it that because it's a comic book movie like Road to Perdition is a comic book movie. They were graphic
Right.
novels, but they're not superhero stories by any stretch. And this was I think it was on DC's Vertigo imprint, and it was similar story, not exactly the same. But it's a similar story where a small town guy stops an altercation, and then his history and his life kind of
Paz comes
unravels.
back to find him, right?
It's
Yeah.
a little different in the graphic novel where Richie isn't his brother. It was just a guy that he did a job with back when, and it goes in a different direction. But as an adaptation of a graphic novel, I thought it was kind of neat it makes me want to seek that out and at least check it out once.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I agree.
But it just shows you that like good stories can come from, they don't have to be a novel. It can be a graphic novel. It can be, you see it come from like manga and serials and stuff like that too. I just saw recently Edge of Tomorrow for the first time, and that was based off of a manga as well. So it's just cool to see stuff like that get adapted and done well.
Yeah, and it's also cool when it's like, I mean, because I wouldn't expect that. Like, I would have never saw this and go, "Oh, that's obviously from a graphic novel." Like, you just
Right.
wouldn't even think that. So,
Never
something
would've.
like Sin City, you would think that. I mean, it just looks like a graphic novel. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting when the source material kind of surprises you too. That's another element to it.
Yeah, and like one of the biggest things they changed was in the source material they're Italian American. And basically Cronenberg, when he cast Ed Harris and William Hurt and Viggo Mortensen, was like, oh, Italian American probably not going to work. Like if you try to shoehorn that in, it's going to end up coming off wrong. So instead he made them Irish mobsters. And that ends up working better for the actors that they have, and I think the story kind of works a little bit better because it would be, again, it's that cliche of when you think of mobsters, you think of the Italian American mobsters. So let's go in a different direction, have them be Irish instead.
I agree. I agree.
So like that, I did read that scrutiny on this as with all IMDb trivia, but according to that, Thomas Jane and Harrison Ford were offered the role of Tom and turned it down. Thomas Jane has me interested because he and honestly Harrison Ford to an extent does too, because these are all actors that have a certain type of intensity.
Yeah. And they could all probably play soft and hard like Vigo does, but yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. And I also know that this was the start of a pretty cool relationship between him and Cronenberg as well.
Oh yeah.
So
And honestly, I don't know
Harrison Ford, I'm
how.
gonna pass. I gotta be honest. I don't know. I just feel like this story would play better for somebody that wasn't as huge in 2005
Oh,
as Harrison
for
Ford
sure,
was.
for sure. Now, had I not seen Harrison Ford in What Lies Beneath, I never would have bought it.
hmm
But I think that movie at least showed me that, yeah, he can go a little darker and it could work. But the problem with somebody like Harrison Ford is now all you're going to see is Harrison Ford playing this character.
Right.
Whereas Vigo is such a good Vigo's like a character actor that has a little bit of leading man in him instead of being a leading man, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it works quite a bit more. And then the other one was, what was this? Oh, the restraint of Cronenberg. He actually cut down the scene in the diner with McCaddy and the younger guy was originally meant to be even more bombastic and like the young guy getting shot like 7 or 8 times before he goes through the class and all this stuff. And he wanted to tone that all. It wasn't the MPAA that had him edit that down. He toned it down himself.
Well, you could tell. I mean, we kind of already talked about that, but you could tell that there's a lot of scenes that were restrained in this movie, especially when you're thinking it's a Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it still has its stuff, but I think, and hearing you say that, I'm not surprised. I feel like that was a choice for him to kind of edit it down like that to where the violent parts of the movie were not the main focus of the movie, even though it's a movie about violence, which I thought was an interesting way to spin it.
So you mentioned earlier about remaking this. I'm just curious, would you have Cronenberg remake it, or would you find a younger director maybe to try it out?
Have his son do it, Brandon.
Oh, good call. All right, I like that.
I think that'd be cool for the lineage. And then, I love him anyway. I love Possessor. I loved Infinity Pool this year. I think that as a filmmaker, Brandon Cronenberg brings a lot of the visual stuff when it comes to like cinematography and production design and stuff like that I wish were in more David Cronenberg films. But I like the David Cronenberg stuff more for just kind of the outlandish, ways we see the directions we see the characters go in, and like the different plot points. This movie aside, because it's pretty straightforward, but most of Cronenberg's projects are really kind of out there.
Oh yeah, I mean,
so
the last Cronenberg
marriage
movie
of those two would be cool.
Yeah, the last Cronenberg movie I watched before this was Naked Lunch. So again, kind of hitting the other end of the spectrum of Cronenberg.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So then, I guess the other question. So I like Brandon Cronenberg directing it. Who would you cast as Tom? Who would be that kind of an actor? Because Viggo at this point, like, people forget how long Viggo Mortensen has been in films and television. Like, he got his start in the mid '80s.
That's true.
And by this point in 2005, I think he was already almost 50. So he wasn't a young man anymore, but he plays a little bit younger sometimes than he's got kind of a rugged good looks to him.
Yeah, I would say somebody like, again, I'm trying not to pick anybody that's like a huge name, like we were talking about Harrison Ford, but
right.
Somebody like a Taron Egerton or like Adam Driver, maybe, somebody like that kind of has like that boyish kind of like small town feel, but you would buy it that they were a badass too,
Yeah, because they got to have that quiet intensity,
right,
to pull off. I think this type of a character, just because.
Yeah, I would say
Driver's not a bad choice, actually.
Yeah, I'm thinking either him or Taron Egerton off the top of my head, but yeah.
I also did like that this movie is the reason that Ed Harris cast Viggo Mortensen in Appaloosa a couple years later.
Oh.
Because Ed Harris directed that, and he liked working with him enough in this that he brought him back, and they did that movie together. So that's kind of cool. Also, and this was a funny piece of trivia, was the first scene in the diner with Ed Harris, they had to reshoot a couple of times because Viggo couldn't keep himself composed. He kept cracking up and laughing. And so they finally figured out, according to what I read, they figured out how to get him to do it by having Ed Harris in that scene isn't wearing pants. He's just sitting there in like boxer shorts.
What?
And it like to make Vigo act normal while he's in this ridiculous, he's wearing the suit with no pants.
That's funny.
That cracked me up. Like
that is
just
funny.
like stories like that make me want to just get in, make more movies. Cause again,
for sure. That's great.
That's Cronenberg talking about like, we get to play for a living. Like we just get to play and have fun. Like he's an interesting guy to listen to. And so
yeah,
I like that. And I would put this as one of my better Viggo Mortensen performances. There's a few things I still need to see of his, but he's really good in this. And as good as he is, you are right in that William Hurt is a lot more fun. He's getting to really have fun.
So good, man.
And
yeah,
just
I'm trying to think.
Go for it.
I just saw it, so it's like recency, perhaps, but I do think it's one of Vigo's best, honestly. Like, I mean, obviously, I love him in Lord of the Rings stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in Witness with Harrison Ford, which he was really good in that.
Yep.
I mean, he's done some good stuff, but aside from the Lord of the Rings, I mean, Green Book, I wasn't a huge fan of, but he was well revered in that movie a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But aside from the Lord of the Rings stuff, this might be my favorite role of his too. It was just so cool how he played like the calm small town dude and the brutal killing mobster like in the same movie,
Yeah, that's I think what puts this performance up there for me is the two different versions and how they're not, it's not wildly different people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very restrained in the way that he does. It's subtle differences between them. I also love him in Crimson Tide, but it's not a big role, but he's great in it. But
memorable.
This has got to be like one of his best performances. I do need to see. I'm with you. I need to see Eastern Promises though, because I hear that's really good.
Yeah, we can do that one next because I want to watch that one after seeing this one for sure. I just passed me by, man. I just never saw it.
Same. Yeah, I mean this is great. And look, we also got. You might not be able to hear this, but there was a great moment where in the first sex scene that you were talking about and how awkward it was. I did love the way he said, "You're naughty." There was something about that it made me laugh because it felt like he was seeing his wife with new eyes for like realizing something about her that he just never really noticed before. And I just love the way he said that. So it was just that
"You're naughty."
It was like this wide-eyed boyish way he said, "You're naughty." And it just cracked me up.
Nice.
No, look, this was a great choice. So I'm glad that neither of us had seen it, so that we got the chance to watch it.
Cool.
But it's kind of cool that we both saw it for the first time and kind of came away with similar ideas of it, and sort of that desire to, like, I have a desire to maybe not right away, but at some point revisit this movie and watch it again.
Yeah, sure.
With those eyes.
I will as well.
Yeah. So
especially now that I own it.
That's right. Next time we got to watch it on the Blu-ray.
That's right. Yeah, I'm definitely going to rewatch it. I enjoyed it. I mean, I'm not going to say more than I thought I would because I kind of thought I would enjoy it, but it was a different movie than I was expecting because it's Cronenberg. It's called A History of Violence.
Mm-hmm.
And what you get is this really small town character study. And that's not what I was expecting, but I really enjoyed it despite that.
Yeah, I like when a movie can surprise me and not be what I expect it to be. And that's been happening to me quite a few times lately. I saw a film called Fish Story a couple of months ago. It's a Japanese movie about the blurb of it is a early 70s or mid 70s Japanese punk rock band creates a song that saves the world. And it doesn't make any sense. And the movie's really strange, but it was one of those that just surprised me with how much I enjoyed it. And that was sort of like this. This was a movie that I was like, well, it's Cronenberg, it's Vigo. I hear so many good things about it. It reviewed well and all of this. but the amount of enjoyment I got, that I took away from it as a film watching experience was really great. Similar to Mulholland Drive, which I just saw for the first time recently.
Oh, I love that one. That's one of my all times.
And that was a movie where, again, I went into it thinking, I'm going to probably like this because people that I trust in their taste in movies have told me good things about it, but I wasn't prepared for how much I would like Mulholland Drive. And that was how this one was for me. So this was a lot of fun. And plus, I mean, it's just great having you on the show. We don't do this enough.
Agreed. I love chatting with you for sure.
Now, you have Two Peas on a Pod. Let people know about that show and where they can find it.
Yeah, I mean, the flagship podcast is the main show. We do a top 5 format. Travis has been on quite a few times, hopefully going to come back soon. And we just count down whatever it is in the world of movies and TV, sometimes music. But lately, I've really been pumping up my YouTube channel. I'm trying to, kind of broaden my awareness there. So I've been doing movie reviews, trailer reactions. You can also see, visual version of the podcast on the YouTube channel as well. So there's a lot of cool, predictions for Academy Awards and reactions to different stuff that I'm watching for the first time and all that kind of stuff on my YouTube channel. So it's just Two Peas on a Pod on YouTube as well. And that's TWO spelled out. But that's also where you can find us pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts as well.
Awesome. And you just recently did, I guess recently was a month or two ago, the Golden Peas Awards.
We did. I brought it back. I was on hiatus last year, just in general, so I didn't do it last year. But it's just a fan ran awards, basically. I mean, all I do is put together the results and then put it into a video. But yeah, I just let the fans on Twitter and my followers kind of vote on. It's basically taking that kind of Academy Awards formula, but just what would you pick? Because obviously the Academy doesn't always get it right. So.
That's true.
As I know painfully well. Although they did good this year with Everything Everywhere. I love that movie. So
they absolutely got that one right.
But generally speaking, it's a crapshoot. So the Golden Peas is just a fun thing I do where I let the fans vote on the best movies of the year, and then we put it up on YouTube. We had a good time. So it's on the feed if anybody wants to check that out and go back and revisit that as well.
It's worth watching. I caught it live, most of it live, and I had a good time with it. So
yeah, I remember you being there, man. Thanks for tuning in. It was great. We got a lot of good participation, and it's hard when you do a live stream because it's like the old days in the 80s and 90s. I can remember my dad saying, "All right, we got to be in front of the TV at 8:00, to watch Cheers or whatever." But it's like that's not the world we live in anymore. People just want to kind of tune in when they can, So
yeah.
I get it. So the Golden Peas is up there if anybody wants to go back and check it out now.
Definitely. Two Peas on a Pod, and I've got some ideas of some things we'll talk about, and definitely gonna have you back here now that because I know last year you were on hiatus for a little bit, so it's been a little longer than I think either one of us would have wanted to work together again. So it's good to have you here.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, you're welcome on my show anytime, brother, and thanks again for having me tonight as well.
Absolutely. Now, this show I record live right now on Twitch, twitch.tv/TV's Travis. Typically Sunday nights. This is a special night, but it'll come out as a podcast next Wednesday, anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can always go to tvstravis.com. There you'll find all the shows that I do. You'll find links to merch and Patreons, and I'm slowly getting blog posts up of stuff that I'm working on. Because like you, I'm trying to broaden out a little bit. Do a few more things than just the podcast. Get some more I'm trying to get more reviews of stuff and get my thoughts out there as well. So tvstravis.com is the easiest place to find all of that. And yeah, Gerald, thank you so much for being here this week. And next week is going to be to be determined. So just keep an eye on Twitter or tvstravis.com and find out what the next movie is going to be. Until then, remember to enjoy your movies. And let's be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
How do you fuck that up? do you fuck that up?
I could not help myself. That had to be the sound.